Trauma is not what happened to you. Trauma is how your body was affected by it. Trauma just means wound. And so you can take two people that have went through the exact same thing, and both of them are going to have different reactions or different wounds from them. The wound that's inside is the trauma, not the event that took place. And so that is really one of the biggest misconceptions that I'm often correcting for people. Again, trauma just means wound, and also trauma is what happens inside of you, not what the event that happened.
This week, we sit down with Alexandrea Long, a licensed clinical social worker, certified clinical trauma professional and supervisor, and the founder of Live Consciously. She brings a profound perspective on trauma-informed therapy, internal family systems, and the role of psychedelic integration in deep healing. In this episode, we discuss how trauma isn't just about what happens to you. It's about how it's stored in the body, how emotions serve as a guide to self-discovery, and how psychedelics, when used with intention, can help us access and heal the parts of ourselves that traditional therapies sometimes can't reach. If you've ever felt stuck in repeating patterns, questioned the weight of your emotions, or been curious about the transformative potential of psychedelics in mental health, join us on this subconscious exploration. I'm your host, Ryan Olekson, and this is Beyond 80%. Hello, Alexandrea. How are we doing today?
I'm doing great, Ryan. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thanks for being on Beyond 80%. Because this podcast is all about challenging our own beliefs and looking at things with a different perspective, I'd love to know something that you've recently unlearned or took a different look at.
That's a great question. You know what? To be honest, probably for about 8 years now, the way that I view the world is from a outside of the box perspective. And so I kind of realized what we're taught is not always necessarily the truth. It's not always what we want to follow. So I look at life from this different perspective. So it's really an everyday thing that I face the world with. It could be challenging sometimes, being the only one kind of in a circle that thinks differently. But it is something that I definitely use in my everyday life.
I feel very similar, and I can relate to being, I don't like to say the oddball, but the outlier in some of the ways that I think as well. And I'm curious to know how you confront that and how you deal with commentary from others.
Yeah. Well, you know what, Ryan? From others is not really the biggest commentary that I've had to deal with. It's my own part still operating from past programming. So to be honest, it is self that I face the most, because once it gets out there, people most of the time are very receiving of what I say. And if not, they don't tell me. So, so really it's an inside battle. But that's what I absolutely love about parts work, because it helps me conceptualize that it isn't all of me that feels that way. It may be just a part that feels that way. So that makes it more manageable.
Oh, well said. And you walked us right into a great transition. So let's get a little bit more into your background. You've been in the field since 2016 and bring a trauma-informed approach to your work. What originally sparked this passion for psychology, and how did it evolve into founding Live Consciously?
Well, again, my own trauma, growing up. I like to say that the suffering that I was going through before suffering can motivate change. And so it definitely did that for me. And so it took me kind of going on my own journey and realizing some things about myself and doing my own healing work. And once I saw it was possible for self, I was like, it's too easy to help other people. And so Live Consciously is just kind of even in the name, just to, be authentic and be conscious about the way that we're living. So it really was a self inside journey that took place. So.
Was there a particular moment or experience that was the real catalyst behind this change?
Yeah, I think I was kind of in a relationship, and I was noticing a lot of patterns that was taking place within my life. And so it really kind of helped me start digging deep. I read this book called The Inner Work by Matt and Ash, I believe, that really opened my eyes to see the fact that healing is really possible for everyone. And the only reason why I had some of those wounds were because of my upbringing. It really wasn't because I was like born broken or anything like that. And so, again, by seeing the light myself, it really sparked me to kind of help other people, I guess, cultivate or see that light within themselves.
There's nothing like a good relationship to mirror back what's going on inside.
That's it. That's it. That's it. Absolutely. And it did. It
Yeah.
did. Yeah, yeah. But I'm so grateful for it. I'm so grateful for it because again, I probably wouldn't be where I'm at without those challenges. So yeah.
Beyond your formal education, what personal experiences or mentors have influenced your approach the most?
You know, I like to tell people all the time, I'm a pretty big nerd. So I really look into a lot. Gabor Mate is one of my favorites. Dick Schwartz is the founder of IFS is wonderful. Bisa Vanderkolk, all of these famous leaders, they really were out there speaking the truth. And by me seeing them do it, I realized that, hey, you know, I absolutely can do that. And so really it's those big names that really made a big difference in trauma work. And so they really inspired me to go out and speak the truth myself. Mhm.
I love that. And I also love Gaber Mate.
Yeah,
He is,
homie.
when I discovered him, my mind was like blown. I was like, yes, yes, everything he's saying.
Love it. Love it.
For listeners who are new to this whole space, how would you describe the heart of your work?
Yeah, yeah. Well, a big passion of mine is helping people become aware of their internal system. So when we talk about parts, it's just, you know, I get the light bulb that goes off in people when I encourage them that they have a right to feel multiple different ways at one time. And they can feel and think very contradicting ways at one point, at one time. And so one of my biggest passions is helping people become aware of their internal system. Is that what I like to remind people is that trauma work is really about coming home to yourself.
That's so well said. That could be on a quote card.
Yes.
I think too, I think of trauma as such a, I mean, it can be, it's such a horrible experience that you go through, but the learning and the growth from it and how you get to learn yourself through it is really incredible. And I think it's not really spoken about in that way as much as it should be.
Absolutely. Totally agree with you. Totally agree.
What's something people misunderstand about what you do?
Where a lot, I think what I get a lot is a lot of work that I do was actually taught in school, and it really wasn't. Unfortunately, a lot of the way that I approach mental health, a lot of the way that I see our mind and body connection, a lot of the way that I understand that emotions and trauma take place in the body. None of that was taught. Hopefully, now today, you know, I went to school. I finished with my BSW in 16 and my MSW in 2020. And so when I was in school, none of that was really being taught. And so I think the biggest misconception is that a lot of my approach comes from a mental health background. And really, we are just now in mental health pioneering this new approach, this, you know, getting out of this medical model and going into this holistic, that mind and body cannot be separated from one another.
It's incredible this, and to see that we're not using Gaber Mate's methods and theories a little bit more always surprises me. But I have faith that we're going to get there. People like you, especially people like me that are going to advocate for this. So I remain hopeful. Trauma has become a buzzword in recent years, but not everyone fully understands what it really means. What's common misconceptions around trauma that you often find yourself correcting?
One of the biggest ones is that trauma is what happened to you. And trauma is not what happened to you. Trauma is how your body was affected by it. And so I like it. Gabor Mate says all the time that trauma just means wound. And so you can take two people that have went through the exact same thing, and both of them are going to have different reactions or different wounds from them. The wound that's inside is the trauma, you know, not the event that took place.
That's really well said. And Just my personal experience, and other people may feel differently, but when I've done trauma work, I feel a lot of these sessions are geared around the actual event.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know from you, in that work, do you think there's too much focus on the event? And if so, where do you think the focus should be?
That's a great question. Yeah. And I'll start off by explaining this, that oftentimes or sometimes I get clients that don't have a memory of the event, right? However, they're still showing up with these physiological responses within their body, right? Whether it's anxiety, heart racing heartbeat, constriction within the body. And most of us have been taught that we have to look to the event to process it. When really the idea is that I just want to get my body to heal. Right. So if I put less attention, and not that I really want to be careful with my nerves, because not that it is therapeutic to process through an event on a cognitive level. It can be. However, the most important part is processing through it on a physiological or somatic level. And so, really, I get clients, especially during certain work like EMDR and things like that, I get them to focus more on their body, what emotions, what physiological sensations are coming up, because that's what we want to process through. And once you process through that, there's like a magic that happens. The event, the image, the cognitive portion of the event starts to heal itself. And even if I don't recollect a memory from it, as long as I heal it within my body, the event has been processed and integrated.
So, how does trauma show up in the body, and why is addressing it somatically, not just mentally, so important?
Jumping into Peter Levine's, he's the founder of somatic experiencing. And so jumping into a little bit of his wording, we want to finish that arousal cycle off. So something happened and my mind stopped my body from finishing off the arousal cycle that took place. Then I want to tap back into that energy and physically, somatically, physiologically allow that arousal cycle to complete. So unresolved arousal cycles can look like a lot of things. It can look like continuous hyperarousal, which is just anxiety all the time. It can look like avoidance, addictions, working 80 hours a week. It can look like constriction within the body. So, a tight shoulders, constricted stomach. It can look like anger, constantly being angry all the time, constantly being frustrated all the time. So it can look like a lot of things depending on who the client is or who the person is that's presenting it. If I never really truly allowed myself to feel or work through a survival response, which is fight or flight, or and in some oftentimes freeze. If I never really allowed that cycle to be completed, it stays stuck within my system. It stays unprocessed. So let's take this, even processing through emotion. So one thing that my clients know about me is, if we start talking about something that is emotionally triggering or that brings up emotions for them, what I have them to do is go in the body and feel it, because emotions aren't a cognitive response. Emotions take place in a different place in your brain than what thoughts do. Okay. So the only way to get through something is to feel through it. You really have to go through it. You have to allow your body to feel the anger, because that's a normal response from a threatening system. So if something threatens me, anger is a normal response. But many of us, the problem is that many of us were taught that anger is not okay. So we get down and we have an automatic response that will shut that response down. So all that does is cause that energy to stay stuck within our body. If you get so many of those energy bubbles, so to speak, stuck inside of you, it starts to weigh you down. And this is when clients come in with depression, anxiety, addiction, certain things like that. But really all that is unprocessed trauma and unprocessed emotions stuck within their system.
When we're talking about emotions such as depression, anxiety, is it accurate to say that those emotions are a compass to certain things that we've tracked within our bodies?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And if so, I've heard anxiety is fear of the future.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard depression is regret or guilt of the past.
That's it.
Are there specific pathways that you take with your clients when they come in and they say, I have a ton of anxiety or I'm suffering from addiction, that gives you a roadmap to start digging and exploring what those emotions are and how certain traumatic moments showed up for them?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, yeah. I really like parts language because regardless when I get a client in, what I'm seeing them as, instead of looking at the client as they're depressed, I focus on what part of them is depressed, right? How long has this part been online? What caused this part to come online, right? And then we go back. And going back is almost a must oftentimes. We have to go back to understand why. And just a side note, to the understanding why reduces shame, which shame can block growth altogether. Oftentimes, too, there are many what we call maladaptive coping mechanisms that clients have. So if I have a client that has a maladaptive coping mechanism of avoidance, then maybe they avoided feeling for 20 years, right? And how long can you go with avoiding feeling before the system says, I can't do it anymore? And so I look at things like, especially depression, as just the check engine light is on in the car. You know, we were taught oftentimes in school that the check engine light is the problem. And it isn't. It is our system, and it's in the most intelligent ways telling us that, hey, I can't do this anymore. Something's not right. And so instead of looking at the check engine light, we need to go see why it came on. And so that automatically tells me I have to go back. I have to explore and see what took place. What thought processes are here? Does the client have this feeling of just unworthiness? Like what's present? And it just takes exploring and being curious with clients. And it absolutely takes going back to kind of allow that story to be told. And another thing that came up as you were asking that question is one of the symptoms of trauma is a denial of the present moment. And so, of course, I'm going to be in the past thinking about what could have or what should have happened in order to prevent that from happening again, right? Same thing about the future. The brain is designed, I tell people all the time, to keep us safe and not happy. And so I'm going to be looking towards the future in order to try to prevent something from happening. I'm predicting my future based off of my past. And that's what causes anxiety is because my brain is not crazy. I tell people that all the time. Your system is not crazy. It knows what you've been through, but the problem is it only knows what you've been through, if that makes sense. And it takes that generalization and it predicts the future with it to keep you safe. But again, one of the symptoms of trauma is just this denial of the present moment. It's being too much in the future or being too much in the past. So
One
hopefully.
thing that you said that really stuck out is in talking through parts. So there's a part of you that is depressed and that is online. And I love that you framed it that way because I think in our culture, we like to simplify and say, I am depressed, as if the entire person is depressed. And, to your point about people can go through these different traumatic episodes, but the story that they tell themselves can manifest in a variety of ways. And that is directly from our own thoughts. So I can't imagine if you're walking around and you're feeling depressed, but then now you're telling yourself, I am depressed, how that manifests itself versus someone who's, I'm feeling depressed right now, but it doesn't mean it's going to last, or it doesn't mean that's who I am. So I just wanted to call that out because it's really interesting. And we're going to dive into IFS in a little bit, but it's just kind of a different way to think about that thought.
Absolutely. And Ryan, on a neuroscience level, I like to inform clients that when we say that I am depressed, you are thinking within a neural network. So you can't think outside of that neural network. Basically, at that moment, you're only thinking within, if so to speak, a box. And when I say that, my whole system believes it. They're like, yeah, we are depressed, right? That is what's going on, right? And so that language is super important. Super important.
Yeah. And we see it everywhere. We see it on social media. We see it on TV, or doctors telling you this, when they're prescribing medication. And I read this quote a couple of weeks ago, and it said, your subconscious only knows you. It doesn't know anything else. So whatever you tell it, it believes. And I think that speaks directly to this conversation right now.
That's it. That's it.
What are some surprising signs that someone might be carrying unresolved trauma without realizing it? And I'm talking about the symptoms that may not be that obvious, such as
Yeah.
addiction or depression.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Okay. Working 80 hours a week. We have those that are always on this path of succeeding. They always have this mindset that they're trying to get somewhere, not allowing yourself to rest. So, in today's society, we have this, and society kind of adds on to this trauma response, to be very frank with you, of hustling, always trying to get somewhere. And this is a part in IFS language that we have unconsciously adapted to in order to avoid the feelings of unworthiness, the feelings of not being good enough, and so forth. So, yeah, the one I see the most often is that the success part, the success trauma response, that's always trying to get somewhere. And nothing's wrong with wanting to do better, but we know that this creates a problem that whenever we stop doing it, our system is flooded with shame. I see this even the gym culture. I see it within the mental health field, a lot of mental health professionals. And so, yeah, those are the ones that I typically see, that it's really hard to recognize the fact that that is a trauma response.
So, as a listener hearing this, and they may be asking themselves, what would be the difference between wanting to do better versus this behavior that I have is a trauma response?
Yeah.
And you had mentioned that when they're not doing the thing, or quote unquote being productive,
Yeah.
they may feel a flood of shame come into their system. Are there any other emotions that may also flood their system in addition to shame?
Yeah, I would imagine that guilt can come in. Also, anger towards the system. I can imagine that anger could come in, self blame. But really, honestly, all of those feelings get down to the core of shame. It's leading us to this wound of shame that's there. But absolutely, what I've seen is anger towards self. Why can't I get this right? Or what's wrong with me? That type of thing, which again, it all leads us to feel shame within ourselves. So there may be other emotions that show up like anger or guilt, but it really is going down to this core thing of not being worthy. Many of us have placed our worthiness on productivity. And in today's society, it just feeds on that narrative that in order to be worth something, you must be doing. And so again, I call these parts, they can trick us sometimes, because oftentimes when they have a good label to them, so religion, body image, career, success, all of these are what we would call these managers that are online that are really preventing us from feeling unworthiness.
Love it. The thing behind the thing is shame.
Yes.
I think that's, yeah.
Yeah.
So, Alexandrea, you specialize in internal family systems, also known as IFS. Can you break down what that actually means for someone who's never heard of it?
So IFS is just, I like to call it an ideology, but it is a modality. But it's a modality that helps us understand that we aren't just mono or one person. We have multiple parts to our system. And these multiple parts were basically developed due to whatever we needed at that time. So if my system feel like, I don't know, emotions were a threat to my system, I would have unconsciously developed this part that avoids emotions. If people pleasing kept me safe somewhere in childhood, I would unconsciously develop this part that people pleases. And the issue or the problem that causes today is that we can have multiple parts of the system that have these very contradictory belief systems, right? So I may want to be authentic and, hey, let someone know that I don't want to do that, or the answer is no. However, if I have a part of my system that adapted to people pleasing, that may be very contradictory within my system and cause suffering. IFS is just a way to describe our internal system and how it may have developed over time.
Are there techniques that listeners could try to start becoming aware of a part?
Yes, yes. So there's two different ways that I tend to use IFS. So IFS is originally meant to be kind of us going inside and exploring with parts. So really just kind of grounding yourself and going internally and asking yourself, hey, what part of me needs my attention right now? And what we'll start to see is once we start giving parts attention, they sporadically show up and give us information. And they don't just give us information through thoughts. And I want to really encourage that they give us information through sensing. And so maybe you'll start to feel some energy in your chest. Maybe you start to feel some energy in your throat, or maybe in your solar plex. These parts can show up in many different forms, whether through sensing, whether through emotions, whether through thoughts or images. Also, because I am a very intellectualizer, I tend to also help clients identify IFS through intellectualizing. And so just kind of putting these in words, okay, what situations in life do I find that causes some suffering? And so an example of this could be, oh, I don't have the ability to say no, Miss Alex. Okay, whenever I want to say no, I can feel this energy come up and flood my system, right? And so through that, through just thinking this through, we can identify that there's a part of the system that doesn't necessarily know how to say no. And then I can start asking questions. Okay, well, what happened in your life? You know your system the best. So why would there be a part of the system that has a problem with saying no? Oh, well, as a child, I wasn't able to say no. Okay. And then now we have like this picture of it. I think becoming aware within internal family systems, they have three different parts that we talk about. And so we have managers, and these are the parts that are really on all the time. They're very proactive in protecting the system. And then we have these firefighters that come on after the fact, they come through the blazing once we're triggered. And then we have what we call exiles, or our wounded parts that sit back there, where our managers and firefighters' jobs are actually to protect those parts. And so some of the ways that a listener can start to do some of this work is just identifying parts of their system. And we can do that by seeing that how some of our parts have very different roles within the system. So using our awareness, and this can be done through just observing your everyday life on how certain parts run our life. But oftentimes, the way that I help clients identify parts is through identifying what triggers them.
Let's dive into like an example. Let's use the example of the overworker. What are some managers and firefighters and some exiled parts that you might find?
hmm So oftentimes, those of us that have these managers that overwork or are career driven, they're oftentimes protecting a part of the system that may not feel worthy, that may not feel like they're good enough. And this is what we'll call in IFS our exile. And so, what tends to happen is we have these managers that are always online, maybe working however many hours a week, or always constantly striving to get somewhere, which that protects us for a good while. But what happens is that something will happen that will trigger that unworthiness part. And then we'll have what we call a firefighter that'll come through the system. And this firefighter will try to put the fire out in any means necessary, right? And so oftentimes this can look like addictions. Oftentimes this can look like guilt. Oftentimes this can look like just straight exhaustion and depression, because they are trying to prevent the exile of the wounded part from surfacing as well. The problem is that managers can't always keep that part of us down. And because of that, sometimes our wounded parts seep through. And this in turn will trigger a firefighter. And again, a firefighter could be depression. I oftentimes see that for those of my clients that have overworked career parts. They often have a firefighter that may come in that is depressed and will shut the whole system down in order to protect it. But really, at its very, very core, what's happening is there is a part of the client that is wounded. Maybe most of the time that wound took place in childhood, and maybe they feel like they have to be doing in order to be enough. And so it shows up in our career. It shows up through success. It shows up through perfectionism, and so many different other ways.
So just to make sure I got this, we'll take the perfectionist example. I think
Mhm.
we could probably bank that in the overworker as well sometimes. But we have a perfectionist that they have their manager, which the manager would be everything is organized, everything is turned in at work on time. They get the accolades maybe from their bosses and their peers. But now someone comes in and maybe gives them some feedback or criticism about something they've done within their work. So
Mhm.
that now triggers the firefighter to come in and say, oh no,
Mhm.
shame is close because one day in their childhood they were reprimanded or something happened where someone gave them criticism that really brought their self-esteem down or their confidence or what have you. So the
Mhm.
firefighter comes in and puts out the fire by maybe in a form of an addiction or a symptom of depression.
Mhm.
And that keeps the exiled emotion of shame from coming into the system or online for that person.
That's perfect. That's perfect. And what really happens within a few seconds is that once they get that criticism at work, our wounded part has surfaced. But immediately a firefighter comes in and, like you said, maybe it shuts the system down, or maybe it reacts and it gets super angry and it has this big emotional outburst for something that, may have been smaller than what it was.
So I think too, it's important to note that certain emotions are not just managers, certain emotions are not just firefighters. They can be interchanged depending on the experience that that particular person has gone through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Our parts have their own personality, they have their own belief systems, and they have their own emotions. And that's pretty complex when we start thinking about how many parts we have.
One of my favorite things about IFS is when after you've become aware of the part and you've spoken to the part, you've gotten to know the part a little bit more, then there comes this phase of, I guess, acceptance, I would call it, where, you understand why the part is there and why it shows up and how it's protecting you. So, from your perspective with your clients, can you talk a little bit about that phase of acceptance and some things that you've seen in terms of how a client has healed a little more with dealing with some of these parts?
And this is where, Ryan, another thing I'm super passionate about is that healing is about being whole. And so even when we discover these parts in IFS, our job is to integrate it back into the system. There is this narrative oftentimes in mental health that I need to fix this, get rid of that, shoot you out the way. You're not, this is what I need to be like, or whatever the case. But that's not true healing. True healing is that I identify a part, I hear its story, I help unburden it to get it to basically, and by helping unburden, really what I'm doing is getting the part to tell its story and getting it out of the past. Helping the part see that, hey, I'm not 5 years old anymore. I'm not 10 years old anymore. And so once I do that, parts almost sporadically, oftentimes it takes asking them for a new job, and they don't want to do the same job they were doing before. So if the job was people pleasing before, maybe they want to be more authentic now. Maybe they want to help us be, get an authenticity back, right? And so what we get to do now is take that part and integrate it right back into the system. It is never about getting rid of parts. It's about just building a relationship with it now, helping it realize that we're not still back in the trauma. And okay, how can I use this part now for my highest good?
So, another one of your specialties is psychedelic integration. Can you tell us a little more about what this is and how you use it in your practice?
Yeah, yeah. So once a client or someone goes through a psychedelic experience, oftentimes we get a lot of insight from it. And so the idea is we take that insight and we integrate it. There goes that word again. See what it was trying to teach us, process through what it brought to the surface of our consciousness, and then integrate it back into our everyday life. So, how do I take my experience, learn what it was trying to teach me, and then integrate it into my everyday life. And that is really what psychedelic integration is about, is taking an experience, learning what it's taught us, and using it now in my everyday life.
This is an area that is very underserved. I personally think it's going to get a little more popular in mental health practices in general.
Yeah.
And so the one thing that is interesting about this is some psychedelic experiences are weird. I guess that's the best way to put it. They're weird, they're strange, they're not anything that mirrors reality. So how do you decipher these experiences that may sound weird, or when someone's describing them that you're like, oh, little elves or pink elephants? Like, how do you decipher, are all of them something that is teaching us, or are some of them just a way for our brain to express what's happening inside? I mean, how do you work with a client to break this down for them?
I think all of the above. I think all of the above. The great part is we're learning so much more about neuroscience today and our subconscious mind and so forth. And our subconscious mind, it hasn't been fully explored. It's so intricate. It's so intelligent, but it talks to us in a different way. It's not very cognitive. So it talks to us in symbols. It talks to us through parts. It talks to us through sensations and emotions and images. And so what psychedelics do is they take all of our subconscious mind's language and it throws it at us in our face. One thing that I love to explore and understand is the subconscious mind and how it's speaking to us. So when a client comes and expresses or talks about something that happened within a psychedelic journey, it's my job to think outside of the box. It's my job to understand that the subconscious mind is trying to tell us something. And so I study a lot of different people's work, like Carl Jung is a very great one to kind of really understand the subconscious mind and in the shadow and different things like that. And so I take a lot of these ideas and I get very intuitive. I get very curious about what's showing up for a client. And so I ask questions through that means. I get them to explore. And I think this is where also having a good trauma history on a client is important, because I get to kind of look back at my notes like, that happened at 5 years old. Okay, I have that in mind. And so when a client is talking, we're putting the pieces together as to what this could have been or what their subconscious mind is trying to tell them.
Yeah, I love that you put it that way too, because I think I read that only about 5% of the
Mhm.
brain is truly understood, or 5% of consciousness rather.
Yeah.
And when it comes to our subconscious mind, most people are familiar with how it speaks to us in our dreams. And you can look throughout history and see that dreams have always been a very potent way that people understand themselves and the world around them. And I think it's interesting that exploring those psychedelic experiences almost as if they are dreams, and trying to decipher and have the metaphors and meanings behind them. It reminds me, yeah, it's very similar. That's what it reminds me of, is that dream world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the beautiful thing about psychedelics is that it doesn't bring any outside information to. All it is your subconscious mind just being pushed up to the forefront. And so that we know with psychedelics is that all we're facing is ourselves.
Yeah. So when it comes to psychedelic integration, what do you wish more people understood about its potential role in therapy?
That it isn't just a journey. So whenever we do a psychedelic journey, there's a lot of emphasis placed on what the journey in itself, but really the real work comes after the journey. The real work comes after the experience. The real work comes in with taking our awareness of the things that we did learn during our journey and placing it on our everyday experiences therefore after.
Yes, I couldn't agree more with that.
Yeah.
One thing that's always interested me about psychedelics is that I've heard some people, especially those that have addiction, they'll come out of the experience, and when you ask them what they got from it, they'll say something like, I just realized that I can stop drinking. I can stop smoking anytime that I want.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're hearing this, it's kind of like this moment of like, well, yes, that was always the case. And why was it that it took the psychedelics to get there?
Mm-hmm.
And then I am reminded of something that I read, and I'm going to read it here. But the quote was, a somatic perceptual experience creates new neural pathways in the brain. So it's basically saying that with the mind aspect combined with the sensory body experience, that's where these neural pathways are created in the brain and they stick. Versus if I'm saying to myself, well, I can stop drinking, I can stop smoking. But when my body feels that and I believe it in my mind, that's when the real change happens. So I've always been curious in the integration process, how we keep that new neural pathway so that it sticks, and also how, just in mental health in general, how we create this type of experience in a sober mind without psychedelics.
It's a good one. It's a good one. It almost reminds me of, you can know something, but until you know it, until you experience it, it's not really a knowing until it's experienced within the body. So absolutely, absolutely. How we make it stick, oftentimes mimicking it. And so what I have a lot of clients do is go back and really embody what that was. What does that feel like in your body? What does it feel like to feel that? Or what does it feel like to experience that thing? Go back and experience it within your body. Where do you feel that energy at? And through this, what we are doing is firing those neurons to replicate that thing, right? One thing I love about MDMA is that it's like an ego booster. It is a psychedelic that helps turn down the amygdala and boost up love, to be very honest, and kind of to the point there. And by embodying that, practicing embodying that experience, even when we're not on any psychedelics, helps train the brain to keep going back there, to keep replicating that, to keep doing that, right? And so, yeah, we get a client to experience it, not just cognitively, but experience it within your body. And just by practicing this, it helps build the neurons to do it at a later event.
That makes so much sense to me. And I know we're kind of walking in territory where even science is not available to really explain this experience.
Yeah.
But even in my own journeys, to actually feel what I'm thinking or believing in that moment, it has always stuck after the fact. And there is definitely something within the experience that when you're opened up to that opportunity, when, you've told yourself time and time again, I need to stop people pleasing. I need to stop with this addiction. But when you feel it in your body, that's, for me, that's when I've noticed like that switch really happens. So it's so interesting, that connection. And I love what you said about how that integration really benefits the practicing that behavior over and over. But you really do need that experience to go back and feel what it felt like in that moment.
Absolutely. That's the way our system learns, is through feeling. We aren't just thinking creatures. We have so many more senses to us. And so what I love about, psychedelics is it brings all of that to the forefront.
Love it. So how does the experience of different psychedelics vary? So for example, you mentioned MDMA and how it sets aside the ego and it really brings up this love. But can you talk a little bit more about some of the other ones that are popular within the therapy confines?
So all psychedelics, they work on different receptors of the brain and they kind of do different things. And really what they're creating is just an altered state of consciousness, right? And so instead of this, what we're used to, this everyday consciousness, they create an altered state. So as I mentioned with MDMA, it turns down the amygdala and takes away fear. So it's almost like all of our fighting parts are gone to sleep and we're just full with love. What I've noticed with ketamine, they like to call ketamine a dissociative, but what I really notice is just a lot of space between parts. We have an opportunity with ketamine just to confront maybe one or two parts at a time versus the whole system being on at one time. So ketamine, as other psychedelics do, it loosens up our neuroplasticity. So it gives us more access to our parts to learned information, and it kind of turns down the default mode network. Which is the autopilot part of our system for all of those that don't know that. LSD and psilocybin really give us an opportunity to work with parts one on one. What I've seen, and also with my own experience, is to face parts head on. And they oftentimes spit all of this information, all of these emotions, all of these images directly at us to try to get us to heal, to try to get us to heal. So again, they all psychedelics work differently on the brain, and they provide us with different insights that can be used. So just depending on what psychedelic, depending on how our system reacts and responds to it.
So when a client comes to you and they've had a psychedelic experience and now they're looking for that integration, depending on which psychedelic they have had, does that help guide you in the sort of conversations that you need to have, especially when it comes to their parts in that experience?
It definitely does. It definitely gives me more insight. It definitely gives me more insight on what their experience could have entailed. But there's also a bigger piece to it that I want to make sure that I say that everybody's system is unique, and everybody responds and reacts to things, psychedelics, in different ways. And so one thing that I talk about often is that our system knows what it needs to do in order to heal. And so it's really up to me to come in, like I say, with this intuitiveness and allow the client system to lead me. Now, I could take what I know about psychedelics and add it to it. And here's an example. I had a client do ketamine, first time doing ketamine, and she reported that, I didn't experience anything. And I'm like, oh, I was like, okay. I say, so where were your thoughts? And she was like, I didn't have any. I said, okay, well, where were your emotions? Didn't really have any. I said, okay. And I said, well, let's notice that. Let's observe that, right? Because if my thoughts were gone and if my emotions were gone, but I was still here, right? What does that tell us? What does that help us embody that? And I won't really go because that kind of goes into a whole nother spiel, but it's really something to consider. And so because I knew how ketamine works, it absolutely helped me ask those questions. Because one great thing about ketamine, it just brings up this observer, right? So all I'm here is just witnessing and really getting the client to see what that was like. What was it like for your anxiety not to be here, but you were still here, right? So you can't be your anxiety. You can't be those thoughts. You can't be your emotions, right? And so again, it's both ways, depending on how the client responds and reacts to it, as well as my information and knowing about the psychedelics. So,
I love that. Yeah. Cause you always think like, I'm going to have this big experience and it's going to be scary or amazing, but just the being. What does a successful psychedelic integration process look like?
talking about or bringing up and facing those things that took place within the journey, connecting them back to some unresolved trauma, processing through that, coming up with the change that we want to create, and integrating that change into our everyday life. Yeah.
And how would you help a client navigate a quote unquote bad psychedelic experience?
Yeah, I think going back to just what I mentioned earlier, that our subconscious during psychedelic experiences, we're only facing ourselves. And so what was that? I've had experience with a client that did not have a great journey. And one of the things that, we're working on is seeing how whatever that was brought up has always been there. And so it's been affecting us in some type of way outside of our consciousness. But what has happened now is that this thing is being brought up to the forefront, and it's giving us an opportunity to heal whatever this may be. And so it can take many sessions to integrate that. There are also different techniques that are out there now that we can use. So like breath work, EMDR, somatic experiencing, being within the body. This can help us resolve these challenging trips that may have shown up for us. But the biggest thing is just to realize that whatever has come up was already there.
That's really well said. Are there key habits or mindsets that help clients integrate their experiences into everyday life?
Yeah, yeah. Awareness. Awareness is huge, huge, huge. A pause. I just was talking with this a client recently. A pause in between the what is that? The stimuli and the reaction. There's a quote that I'm not going to be able to find real quick, but that's where change happens. So if I take awareness, also with mindfulness, those two things help create change. And so if I know that I faced a controlling part during one of my psychedelic experiences, and now I'm right in front of my child and I have this urge to tell them what to do and control it for them, there's a moment of one, a knowing that I have a part that does that. Two, there's a pause. Okay. And so, yeah, this is what my system, my bodily functions want me to do. But this is what I've learned through my psychedelic experience. So now I have a choice. Right. But we only get that choice is in the moment and with taking that pause. So, presentness, mindfulness, as well as awareness.
What are some of the biggest myths around psychedelic assisted therapy?
Mm, I don't know the biggest myths about psychedelics in general, not around the therapy. That's a because it's such a stigma altogether. Like just in itself, I think the psychedelics in itself that we all saw. I don't know, depending on your age, Brian, but we all saw those commercials that were growing up of the egg on the skillet and saying our brain on drugs and certain things, and many of
The DARE program.
it. Many due to the stigma and all of the things that took place in the 90s and different things like that. There's this huge stigma on psychedelics, but psychedelics were wrongly classed in the wrong class of drugs. And so it's just really getting over our history in Western culture, what psychedelics mean, because they aren't. I don't really consider them drugs. I consider them medicine. And so that's the approach that I have with them. So really kind of just facing some of these stigmas that are out there.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
And so, what are some of the biggest breakthroughs that you've witnessed with clients or even with yourself through this type of therapy?
Well, through myself, there's been a lot of breakthroughs. I think MDMA is wonderful with working with trauma. Very, very wonderful working with trauma. Huge breakthrough. It really kind of allows us to encompass love while we're trying to heal ourselves. It's another big breakthrough. I think it's going back to what I stated earlier about being the observer. When all of these other parts are kind of offline and we're able to still be present and still be here, there's something powerful in that. Even if we already had this understanding that we're an observer, until you really are just observing, it's hard to embody that or it's hard to conceptualize that. And I think that was a huge one, just seeing that, we are these observer. I'm not my trauma. I'm not my anxiety. I'm not my depression. I'm not these thoughts. I'm just observing these things. And so that was huge as well.
And so, we kind of talked around the stigma around psychedelics as it relates to integration and therapy. How do you see that stigma shifting, and what do you think still needs to be changed?
So one of the biggest breakthroughs that we have today is that information is able to be spread at a higher rate than what it was in the past. And so this really kind of gives us access to more of the truth than this one-sided media outlet. We have multiple sources that are able to speak up today. So that's really exciting. Also, all the work that's done in neuroscience, understanding quantum physics, and so forth. These sciences and quantum psychology, really, and being able to take science to understand our system, take science to understand our mind and body connection.
No, yeah, it's as you brought that up, especially with different media outlets. One podcast episode I heard, and maybe you heard about it, it was Rick Perry, who's the former governor of Texas. And he went on Joe Rogan's podcast and talked about the benefits of ibogaine, which is a plant, I believe, found in Africa and has been used in African cultures for hundreds of years. And one of the coolest parts, well, he's extremely, this conservative governor now promoting the use of this psychedelic. especially as it relates to heroin addiction. And when he was sharing the stats around the success rates of sobriety in heroin addiction, it was incredible. I mean, he was talking about success rates in upwards of 90%.
Wow.
And the only pharmaceutical drug primarily used for those addictions, they were averaging about 8 to 9% at this rate of success.
Mhm.
So I totally agree. I mean, it's really cool that we have all these different outlets available. And, I agree that education is huge and spreading around. And I mean, those stats are insane. So it
Absolutely.
was really exciting to hear that.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I'm super excited. I'm super excited because I know that we're breaking through these and even your podcasts and things going on beyond like the status quo, going beyond what the stigmas that we have out there, and actually truly speaking the truth is really what allows it really what inspires me in my field, because I really am big on just spreading the truth, spreading the fact that healing is possible with the right tools and in the right environments.
And on that note, I mean, what role do you think therapists specifically can do in helping to change this conversation around psychedelics for healing and, referencing psychedelics as medicine instead of drugs?
Yeah, yeah. Really educating themselves. Really educating themselves. I'm fortunate enough to be teaching a bunch of clinicians that are coming up, as well as interns and so forth. And one thing that I always encourage them to do is if something doesn't sound right, if something like research, like ask questions, seek the truth. Don't just go with what was told to us. We are discovering now that many of our Western culture ideas weren't built on.
Critical thinking?
Yeah, yeah, they weren't. Yeah, they weren't. They weren't built on critical thinking. They weren't built on the truth. They're grounded in some other things, whether that's finances, whether that's economics, whatever that is. But having the courage to seek the truth is super important. Having the courage to speak the truth is super important. And so I just would encourage other clinicians to seek the truth. Don't just go off of what I'm saying or whatever the case, whatever. Go find out for yourself. If something doesn't sound right, question it. That doesn't sound
Yes.
right. Like, question it,
Yes.
you know, you know. And so that's my biggest hope, is that we really embrace this as a country.
So, what's been the most surprising lesson you've learned from your practice, your clients, your education, and your own experience?
Maybe that all of our systems know exactly what to do in order to heal itself. Yes, the modality we use, like IFS and psychedelic integration, are important, but really the client system in the right environment knows how to heal itself. And as a therapist, my biggest hope is that I just provide a safe space to do that. And that's really what creates change. Love creates change. May sound cliche, but I wouldn't be myself if I did not mention that. And love can be provided in so many different ways, but love really heals. And once we give our system that, whether it's internal love for ourselves or love through relationships, it will heal itself. It'll automatically do that.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
I love that. So, what's next for you and Live Consciously? Do you have any exciting projects on the horizon? Are there any emerging trends that excite you?
Yeah, yeah. So I just recently opened up a group practice, and I've hired five wonderful clinicians. I'm very honored to be able to kind of teach them when they're kind of, getting within the game, so to speak. And so I'm really excited about that. I've been spreading the word again because mainly my organization mission is to go beyond talk therapy, is to really, really provide healing for mind and body. And so I'm super excited about that. I'm super excited about the clinicians I've hired, and we're already accepting new clients.
What's the most important thing from our conversation today that you want listeners to walk away with?
That healing is possible. and we have what it takes in order to heal. There are many different tools out there that can be utilized in order to promote healing. IFS, great one, great one. Psychedelic integration, great one. But along with those tools, there are many other tools that are out there. And I just encourage for us to be curious, be open-minded, and not listen to the status quo or what we were taught to believe about mental health.
To connect with Alexandrea and learn more about Live Consciously, or to schedule a free consultation with her practice, check out the links in the show notes below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode and further topics we can explore on this podcast together. So leave a comment below or reach out via email at beyond80%@gmail.com. Make sure to subscribe to the show so you never miss an opportunity to think, question, and evolve. I'm your host, Ryan Olekson, and this is Beyond 80%.